Rico.
My name is Thrift Behringer, and I am in Comm 4116, or Comm Law, Media, and Ethics, and we were asked to do a presentation on a particular case study that is in our book, and the one I picked is Bush versus Gore. In events leading up to the case in the 2000 presidential election between Vice President Al Gore and Texas Governor George W. Bush, the outcome hinged on the overall votes in the state of Florida. The morning after the election, Governor Bush led former Vice President Al Gore, by 1,800 votes. The return of the ballots in the state of Florida were so close that the Florida law called for an automatic machine recount. Still, after they did that, with the votes still being so close, the Florida law allowed Vice President Gore to pick 4 counties of his choosing for a manual recount. Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris had 7 days after the election to certify the results. So, in essence, each of the counties had 7 days to count over millions and thousands and hundreds of thousands of votes, which takes a lot of time and a lot of due diligence, and you gotta have a lot of patience. So she gave the 4 counties that Vice President Gore picked a week to recount the ballots, as I said. Many counties did not finish in time, which prompted Secretary Harris to continue to move the deadline for another week and then to another week, and finally the Florida Supreme Court, finally had to get involved and gave each of the counties until November the 26th to finish. Miami-Dade County did not even finish the recount because they felt like they didn't have enough time, especially when the Florida Supreme Court and state law got involved. So, with that being said, Al Gore did not like that. Al Gore wanted every vote to be recounted again. So he took them to a local court, and the local court ruled in favor, allowing them the ability not to have to finish. So they didn't have to recount again. On November 26th, Secretary Harris announced Governor Bush's win by 537 votes. So after the recounting and after the November 26th deadline that was given by the Florida Supreme Court, all the votes were recounted and George W. Bush won. And remember, Miami-Dade County did not even recount because they didn't have enough time, and they just quit. And then again, the court ruled in favor for them not to have to recount. So at the local and state level, so now President Gore doesn't like this. He's got to take action. What does he do? The following day, he sues Secretary Harris, alleging that the certified results were illegitimate because the recount process was not yet complete. A legal court just dismissed this claim by Vice President Al Gore altogether. So it prompted Vice President Al Gore to appeal to the Florida Supreme Court. Well, the Florida Supreme Court then ruled on December 8th that all Florida ballots cast but not counted by voting machines, must be manually recounted if they have not been already. So if they've not been through the automatic voting machines, which a lot of votes haven't, they got to be manually recounted. Well, Governor Bush said that's not going to happen. He appeals the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, which started reviewing the case on December 9th, 2000. So now we're actually getting to the actual case. So again, in quick review, Vice President Al Gore did not like the results. He takes it to a local court. They just dismiss it. He then appeals that and takes it to the Florida Supreme Court, which rules in favor of President Gore, saying that all Florida ballots must be recounted. Governor Bush then appeals it, takes it to the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court, George W. Bush petitioner's argument made against Palm Beach County Canvassing Board. It's not Bush versus Gore in the National Supreme Court. It's George W. Bush or Bush versus Palm Beach County Canvassing Board, where that the decision of the Florida Supreme Court allowing a recount of disputed ballots violated both Article 2, Section 1 and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Now, look at this. Equal Protection Clause was used a lot during this case, and it was quite frequently brought up. Each side was allowed to make their case in a 1-hour oral argument that would be recorded on audio tapes. This all happened on December 11th. So on December 12th, on December 12th, in 2000, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 per curiam decision, ruled that Florida Supreme Court's recount order was unconstitutional because it granted more protection to some ballots than to others, violating the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, meaning that it was not right for the Secretary Harris or the Florida law to tell President Gore to pick 4 counties to then recount. Every county should have mattered, and that's the reason why they said that the court then argued, again, voting for president would constitute a fundamental right made for the sole reason to be guarded by the Equal Protection Clause. It is also said that the Florida Supreme Court's order violated this specific right because it was arbitrary. So again, this court was also alleged that the order was held to a standardless and unequal process to divine the intent of the voter that were over and way beyond the settled process that are required by the Florida election law. So, ultimately, the court's decision was it was unruly for the Florida Supreme Court to tell Al Gore that it is okay to go back and recount 4 different counties. It should recount the whole state. So then again, you fill out the case with President Gore until President Bush wins. December 12, 2000 was also the deadline for the Florida electors to submit the vote to Congress for the President of the United States. Thus, with no time to recount the votes again, Governor George W. Bush was the 2000 presidential elect. The outcome of the Supreme Court's decision in Bush versus Palm Beach County Canvassing Board was responsible in the decision of who would become the President of the United States. Again, we're not saying that George W. Bush wouldn't have won if they recounted, but you never know because they did not go back and recount. Which again, they said the reason they didn't go back and recount is because the Florida Supreme Court told Al Gore to pick 4 different counties, and which is saying that every vote does not count, only those 4 counties' votes count, which is wrong. There was immediate criticism and outcry for this decision. And as you can see, look how close. This is one of the closest elections in the history of the United States presidency. And you see how close it was, and it came down to that final 25 electoral votes in Florida, which is why it was so crucial for whoever won that state, which again came down to 537 votes. So, in essence, 537 votes decided the presidential election. So, according to the text, Bush, in relation to today, according to the text, Bush versus Gore made history because for the first time, audio tapes were made available to the press right after the end of a 1-hour oral argument. That's never been happened before. It was never made available for the press. So immediately after the arguments were made that day, they were given to the press to give out to the news media and so forth. 3 years later, because of Bush versus Gore in the case Gratz versus Bollinger, and this is again in the text, audio tapes were made available for the media immediately following the oral arguments. So in 2010, the court changed its policy, so now each week's oral arguments are made available to the press each Friday on its website. Also after Bush versus Gore, the U.S. Supreme Court made sure that all votes are counted for. If they are not, then it calls for a recount until all votes are counted and the results are correct. And also the phrase, every vote counts. I know it's a cliche, but it came and derived from this case. In conclusion, one of the biggest critics after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision was maybe from the court itself when Justice John Paul Stevens was quoted saying, "One thing is certain, although we may never know with complete certainty the identity of the winner of this year's presidential election, the identity of the loser is perfectly clear. It is the nation's confidence in the judge as an impartial guardian of the rule of law." Another critic came from another Supreme Court Justice, Souter, who seriously considered resigning after this, and his attitude towards the court was never the same. Again, many think that there was a lot of corruption in this, which a lot of, as I said right here, many questions were asked and eyebrows were raised because of this decision, becoming one of the most talked about and debated decisions in the history of the U.S. government. So one of the reasons I picked this case is because it's so interesting, and also it has an effect on our daily lives because we had 8 years of Bush instead of 8 years of Gore. And you know, with the presidents, how powerful they are and how they can decide the rule of law. And then also, this says a lot when you have your own the U.S. Supreme Court's own justice coming out and speaking against the decision. That's not what you want. You don't want turmoil within the court, and that's what you're seeing right here. And here are my references, and I want to thank y'all for watching my presentation. And again, my name is Thrift Behringer, and this is for Comm Law, Media, and Ethics. 4116. Thank you for watching.